because my house, it is quite a neat old place. And because of the space, I'm able to have two writing areas. One is a little writing nook that's sort of up above everything, and it's in the trees. There's a big old oak tree outside, and the neighbor's cat comes and sits on the ledge. and it's just kind of lifted away from everything, so it feels very away from everything. So usually first thing in the morning, that's where I go. Well, I fix myself very strong coffee, and then I go and write in that nook. This is on I have to say I don't have a real typical day, but this is on a lucky day. Then I'll go right there for as long as I can usually, and then have a break for lunch, maybe exercise. I live near Lake Merritt in Oakland. Does anyone know Oakland? Anyone here know Oakland? Yeah, great. So there's a big lake downtown. It's called Lake Merritt, and it's a great place. And there's some neat architecture around it. And whenever I walk around the lake, and I think it's 4 miles from my house. It's like three miles around the lake and half a mile there. But whenever I walk around that lake, I always feel like I'm in some sort of public service message for urban life, because you'll hear 10 different languages spoken. Every sort of person you can imagine is out there walking, running, playing, feeding the ducks, hanging out, selling stuff, making music. It's just really lovely. So it's always nice to have a break like that in the day. And then I usually go back and do more work. I don't usually do the creative writing as much in the afternoon. It's more all the other stuff that comes with being a writer. So that's promotions, it's blog posts, it's interviews, it's dealing with my agent or my editor, responding to fan mail if I get it, all of that kind of stuff in the afternoon usually. And then in the evening, if I'm lucky enough, then my boyfriend cooks me dinner. and then sometimes I will go back to work afterward, write again in the evening sometimes, or else I just hang out. Yeah, but it's a nice life, I gotta say. It's very nice life.
So the last of the research questions: what is your favorite story or anecdote that you'd like to tell at parties?
And you gave me a little warning on this one, so now I've been stressing for the last hour. I think, what is my favorite story? Surely I have stories. And I obviously have a lot of stories. I think we all have a lot of stories. And I was trying to think of one that would be particularly interesting for you all. And I didn't come up with anything. So
okay, so moving on.
No, but I do have a story. I think it would be interesting, I hope so. Does anyone know Octavio Paz? Maybe this is why Mexico is on my mind, because I was thinking about Octavio Paz. You did. Okay, for those of you who don't know, Octavio Paz, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1990. He's a phenomenal author, a poet really, but he was from Mexico, and he wrote a book called The Labyrinth of Solitude. Maybe you've heard of that? That's the one that won the prize. Anyway, in Mexico, he's sort of like a cross between, Martin Luther King and Clark Gable. He became this big rock star in a way that I think it would be rare to find a poet being that famous here. But in Mexico, he was quite famous. And back in the day, I lived in Princeton, New Jersey, and my husband at the time was taught there at Princeton. And my ex-husband, was from Mexico originally. So we were at this cocktail party at Princeton, and anyone know Princeton? Familiar with Princeton? It can be a little... It wasn't my style, I'll just say that. I'm from California. So Princeton was I always felt a little bit like I wasn't quite hitting the right beats, It was you were supposed to act a certain way and whatnot. So I was at a cocktail party feeling uncomfortable, as usual. And there were a lot of famous people at this party. That's one thing about Princeton, it brought in a lot of famous people. And so I was sort of sitting in the corner, and this man, he was about this tall, and he was about 80 years old, starts hitting on me. And this was like 25 years ago. And I was like, really? I mean, he was probably 50 years my senior. And, but he starts, and he's talking, and then I finally realize it's Octavio Paz. And Octavio Paz is hitting on me, which I just thought, as someone who has spent time in Mexico and studied in Mexico, I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool. Yeah, that's Octavio Paz. but I was married, of course, and so, and my husband at the time was pretty jealous. So he had gone off to get us some wine, and he comes walking back, and I'm thinking, okay, it's just one of those scenarios where you're like, oh great.
Don't hit the famous author.
What was that?
Please don't hit the famous author.
Yeah, exactly. And he's a Princeton professor, and I'm like, this isn't gonna go well, and what's gonna happen? And he comes up, he gives me my glass of wine, he shakes hands with Octavio Paz, and then he turns and walks away. I was like, really? And I looked over at him, and he's standing on the other side of the room, and I was like, that's the kind of silent language you have, and he looked at me and he just shrugged. He's like, he's from Mexico. He goes, if Octavio Paz wants you, I guess that's it. So that was my story. And I did not go home with Octavio Paz. I'll make that clear.
San Francisco, including Oakland and the various suburbs and other cities, is almost a major character in all of your stories.
Yeah.
The city is so many different things to so many different people. What is San Francisco to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I was born and raised in that area, in the Bay Area. And ironically enough, I've lived all around San Francisco, and I've never actually lived in San Francisco. So maybe in part it's, it's still a little wish fulfillment for me. Because San Francisco really has been, ever since I was little, what you did when people came in from out of town, I grew up in Cupertino, which is the South Bay, and what we would do is go to San Francisco. And it was this magical place just full of everything. Life and hills, and it's beautiful, and even as a child I could see how beautiful it was. The architecture is beautiful, all the hokey stuff, the cable cars, Lombard Street, all of that, I still love. I still love all the cheesy tourist areas. But then as I grew up, I got to know also how many neighborhoods are there. And I think San Francisco's, has everyone been to San Francisco, or anyone? It's more European in that there are small pockets of neighborhoods that are very kind of well-defined and have their own very unique characteristic.
If you ask somebody where they live, they're not going to name a street, they're going to name their little...
Exactly, their little pocket.
Yeah.
And San Francisco, is on a little thumb of land that can't grow. So I think because of that, it just kind of intensifies, everything intensifies. So I think it's always been to me this kind of glowing, interesting, wonderful place. And then it's full of tourists. And people never believe me when I say this, but I actually love tourists. I think that people coming in and they bring in new ideas and they bring in energy and they're just all excited and they're happy and they sometimes open your eyes to things that you don't even see anymore. Like the Golden Gate Bridge. Every time I drive over the Golden Gate Bridge, I see all the people walking the Golden Gate Bridge, and it reminds me that they've come from all over the world to see this iconic bridge. And almost every time I go across that bridge, I'm reminded to look up and just take in the majesty of it, because it's so beautiful.
Now, Juliet Blackwell is a pen name.
It is.
How did you acquire it?
Well, how or why? Well, the how is actually pretty straightforward. Julie's my real name, and so Juliet, my mother and father apparently argued over whether to be Juliet or Julie, and so Juliet just sounded a little more, more formal, slightly more formal for a name. And then the Blackwell I adopted from Elizabeth Blackwell. If anyone knows, she was the first woman in the United States to become a doctor. And she was allowed to go to medical school because at the time the medical students voted on the new students, the incoming students, and they thought when they got this application from a woman, they thought it was a joke. So they voted for her to be admitted, and then she was admitted, and of course she kicked everybody's butt because, when people keep you out that long, you're going to go in and do a great job. So she did a great job, and then she eventually went to England and set up a medical school and worked with Florence Nightingale, and they both were real pioneers in medicine. So I stole it from her. I just thought that was such a great story, and actually the first series that I wrote with that name was the Witchcraft Mystery Series, and for those of you who were listening to me earlier talk about witchcraft, for me the connection between the history of witchcraft and the history of medicine, I find really intriguing. how witchcraft is often about healing. So I kind of made that connection.